The restaurant was nearly empty. A soft hum of jazz floated through the dimly lit space, mingling with the clink of cutlery and the occasional whisper of a departing patron. Outside, the city's streets glistened with the remnants of a light drizzle, reflecting the neon signs like scattered jewels. Inside, Alexander Grant sat alone, a man surrounded by luxury yet haunted by desperation. His tailored suit fit impeccably, every crease sharp, every cuff immaculate, but it did nothing to mask the exhaustion etched into his face. Dark circles traced the line of his cheekbones, and his eyes, one sharp, commanding, untouchable, looked weary, almost fragile. In front of him, a stack of legal papers lay spread across the table, illuminated by the warm glow of a single overhead lamp. A fountain pen rested in his hand, trembling slightly. He had been here for hours, wrestling with numbers, clauses, and contracts, trying to piece together a solution that might save him. Months of poor investments, risky mergers, and unforeseen setbacks had led him here, to this fragile moment, at nearly 4 a.m. Bankruptcy loomed like a shadowed storm on the horizon, threatening to engulf everything he had built, his empire, his reputation, his pride. Alexander exhaled heavily, staring at the contract in front of him. This deal, he told himself, was a final step, the lifeline that would pull him from the precipice. He knew the terms inside out, or at least he thought he did. The lawyer who had prepared the documents assured him everything was in order. Yet, an unshakable nagging doubt lingered, a tiny whisper in the back of his mind that perhaps he had overlooked something. He ignored it. Pride, stubbornness, and sheer exhaustion were his shields. A waiter approached, pausing briefly as if to check whether Alexander wanted another drink. "Still with us, sir?" the young man asked politely. Alexander nodded absently, eyes still glued to the contract. "Yes, just a little longer." His voice was dry, hoarse from hours of silent muttering and pacing. The restaurant grew quieter as the night progressed. The hum of the city outside seemed distant, a faint reminder that life continued while his own world teetered on the edge. He had always been in control, a man who commanded boardrooms, investors, and headlines. Yet here he was, powerless, vulnerable, clinging to a stack of papers that held the fate of his fortune. He picked up the pen, feeling its weight as if it were both a tool and a weapon. One signature. That was all it would take. He envisioned the headlines. Alexander Grant saved his empire, a tale of brilliance, resilience, and unmatched foresight. He imagined the sighs of relief, the congratulations, the reassurance that he had once again outmaneuvered disaster. But the nagging doubt persisted. A subtle detail in the contract, a number, a clause, a line of text he could not fully recall, pricked at the edge of his mind. He brushed it aside. He had faced crises before. He had survived recessions, hostile takeovers, and market crashes. This would be no different. As he raised the pen to sign, the faint sound of approaching footsteps caught his attention. She appeared silently at his side, a waitress who had been serving tables with quiet efficiency all evening. She was young, composed, her expression a mixture of politeness and curiosity. Her name was Lily, though Alexander did not know it yet. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, holding a small notepad as though it were a shield. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think there's a mistake in your papers." Alexander froze. His hand hovered above the contract, the pen suspended in midair. A mistake? At this hour? By her? He barely had time to process the audacity of it before irritation surged. He glanced at her, expecting hesitation, uncertainty, or even fear. Instead, her eyes met his with calm clarity, unshaken by his presence or status. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight, wary. "I noticed a number," she continued, careful but precise. "It doesn't seem to match the calculations on the last page. I might be wrong, but, well, I thought you want to check before signing." Alexander blinked. This wasn't the kind of interruption he tolerated, not at 4 a.m, not when the weight of his empire rested in his hands. He opened his mouth to dismiss her, to insist that she had no idea what she was talking about, but something in her tone, a subtle confidence, a hint of intelligence, made him pause. He stared at the papers again, then back at her. Every instinct told him to continue, to sign and finish this ordeal. Yet curiosity, stubbornness, and that lingering whisper of doubt tugged at him. Perhaps, he thought reluctantly, a second pair of eyes couldn't hurt. Lily waited patiently, hands folded, eyes scanning the contract as if she understood its intricacies better than he did. The tension in the room thickened, the quiet of the restaurant amplifying the gravity of the moment. Outside, the city slept, unaware that within these walls, the fate of a billionaire hung in the balance. Alexander set the pen down slowly, the weight of his pride and desperation pressing down on him. He had spent his life trusting his own judgment, relying on instinct, intellect, and experience. Yet now, faced with a simple waitress pointing out a possible mistake, he realized how fragile even the greatest empires could be. For the first time in a long while, he felt uncertainty, not the controlled, calculated kind he'd lived with, but raw, uneasy doubt. He realized he had a choice: ignore her and risk everything, or listen and potentially save his fortune. The decision rested in his hands, hovering like the pen above the contract. The night stretched around them, silent and expectant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And then Alexander finally nodded. "Show me," he said. Lily smiled faintly, her eyes glinting with quiet determination. "Of course," she said, leaning slightly over the table to point out the detail. As the pen lowered, the first thread of hope pierced the dark clouds of his despair. A mistake could ruin him or save him, and the answer lay not in boardrooms or advisors, but in the careful eyes of someone who saw what he couldn't. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying the young waitress who had dared interrupt him at the most critical hour of his life. Her name tag read Lily, simple and unassuming, but her presence now carried an unexpected weight. The pen he had been ready to sign with hovered in his hand, suddenly insignificant compared to the uncertainty her words had injected into the night. Lily's eyes scanned the papers on the table, sharp and deliberate. "Here," she said softly, pointing at a particular section. "This number here. It doesn't match the calculations on page 5. If you sign it like this—" Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Disaster awaited. Alexander frowned, leaning over the contract. His first instinct was disbelief. How could a waitress notice something a team of highly paid lawyers had missed? Yet as he squinted at the figures, tracing each line, a cold chill ran down his spine. She was right. There was a miscalculation, subtle but catastrophic. The wrong figure would lead to immediate financial ruin if he signed. "Are you certain?" he asked cautiously, though pride pricked at him. "You understand the implications of what you're saying?" "I think so," Lily replied evenly. "I don't know everything, but I've done a little work with numbers in the past. It stood out to me. I thought you want to know before it's too late." Alexander ran a hand over his face, tension radiating from every line of his body. The world he had controlled so meticulously, the empire he had built from the ground up, now depended on the observation of someone he had previously considered beneath his notice. His ego bristled, yet rational thought forced him to acknowledge the truth. You're not wrong," he admitted reluctantly. "This could have ruined everything." Lily nodded, calm but empathetic. "I didn't mean to overstep. I saw the numbers, and it felt wrong. I didn't want anyone to get hurt." A silence fell between them, broken only by the soft hum of the restaurant lights. Alexander's mind raced, replaying every deal, every decision, every misstep that had brought him to this vulnerable moment. He had always relied on his instincts, trusting in his intellect and experience above all else. Yet here he was, on the brink of bankruptcy, saved by a perceptive stranger. "Sit down," he said abruptly, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Let's go through it together." Lily hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pulled out the chair, perching on its edge. Her demeanor was steady, professional, yet approachable. Alexander handed her a pen. "Show me where you notice a mistake," he said. Together, they examined the contract. Lily pointed to the figure that had caused the discrepancy. She explained, step by step, how it conflicted with the previous page, how one minor oversight could trigger a cascading failure in his finances. Alexander listened, silently impressed by her clarity and logic. He realized something unexpected: humility. It wasn't something he had felt in years, not in business, not in life. Yet here it was, creeping into the simple act of listening to someone willing to speak up. Pride wore with gratitude. Ego battled awareness. But slowly, Alexander allowed himself to accept the truth. "You're remarkable," he said after a moment, more to himself than to her. "Most people have kept quiet or assumed I knew better." "I just wanted to help," Lily replied, shrugging slightly. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes notices what years of experience miss. Alexander chuckled softly, a sound that carried both relief and disbelief. "Years of experience, and I almost missed this," he murmured. "I almost signed my own bankruptcy." He set the pen down and leaned back, rubbing his temples. The adrenaline of the near mistake coursed through him, leaving a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had come to this restaurant thinking he was in full control, yet the reality was humbling. One overlooked figure, one simple error, and everything could have collapsed. "Thank you," he said finally, meeting her gaze. "I don't know how to repay you for this." Lily smiled faintly, a quiet, unassuming gesture that felt warmer than any praise. "You don't need to. Just be careful. Numbers have a way of sneaking up on even the smartest people." Alexander laughed, a low, relieved sound. "I suppose they do. I should have known better than to rush at 4 a.m. Pride makes fools of us all." For a moment, they sat in silence, two unlikely companions connected by a twist of fate. The restaurant, still dim and hushed, seemed to hold its breath along with him. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to brush the skyline, signaling a new day, a new chance. "I need to call my lawyer," Alexander said, finally breaking the silence. "We'll verify everything officially. But you've given me a lifeline tonight." "Of course," Lily replied, standing. "I'm glad I could help." Alexander watched her for a moment, noting the calm confidence she carried. She wasn't just a waitress. She was perceptive, brave, and unafraid to speak the truth when it mattered most. Perhaps, he thought, this night would not only save his fortune, but also remind him of something he had long forgotten, that sometimes wisdom comes from the most unexpected places. He picked up the phone and dialed his lawyer, every word measured, every instruction precise. He double-checked the figures, cross-referenced the clauses, and ensured that the correction would prevent disaster. The relief that followed was palpable, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Yet, even in his relief, Alexander felt a subtle shift within himself. The night had reminded him that arrogance could be dangerous, that assumptions could be fatal, and that sometimes salvation arrives in the form of someone who simply cares enough to speak up. By the time the call ended, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the restaurant windows. Alexander placed the corrected papers in his briefcase and exhaled deeply, feeling a strange sense of gratitude and clarity. He looked toward Lily, but she had already moved on to another table, attending to the quiet work of her night shift. He smiled, not just at the relief of avoiding financial ruin, but at the lesson the night had imparted. Life, he realized, was full of surprises, some perilous, some life-saving, and humility was a bridge between the two. As he left the restaurant, Alexander Grant felt lighter, wiser, and, strangely enough, more alive. He had faced the brink of ruin and had been saved by a stranger's insight. And for the first time in years, he welcomed the unknown with open eyes, ready to face whatever came next with care, attention, and perhaps a little more humility. The first light of dawn crept over the city skyline, spilling soft golden rays across the quiet streets. Alexander Grant stepped out of the restaurant, the cool morning air brushing against his face, a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped him just hours before. The papers were now safely in his briefcase, verified, corrected, and ready to be filed. He felt a weight lift from his shoulders, one that had nothing to do with the documents themselves, and everything to do with the humility he had rediscovered. Inside the restaurant, Lily moved gracefully among the tables, clearing plates and greeting the few remaining patrons. She carried herself with the same quiet confidence that had startled Alexander the night before, but now, in the soft morning light, there was an almost gentle glow to her presence. He watched her for a moment, realizing that her courage, her perceptiveness, had done more than just save his finances. It had reminded him of the value of listening, of observing, of trusting others when pride threatened to blind him. He approached her table, feeling unusually unguarded. "Lily," he began, his voice softer than he would have expected from himself. "May I thank you properly?" She looked up, surprise flashing briefly across her features. "You don't need to," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I just did what I thought was right." "No," he insisted, leaning slightly forward. "I mean it. Tonight, you saved me from losing everything. I can't repay that with money alone, though I intend to ensure you are recognized for it." Lily tilted her head, curiosity mingling with caution. "Recognized? I don't know what you mean." Alexander chuckled softly, a sound tinged with relief and newfound humility. "I mean that sometimes the simplest acts, paying attention, speaking the truth, are worth far more than any amount of money or prestige. But I would like to do something, in whatever way you feel comfortable. Perhaps dinner, on me, under better circumstances than last night?" She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but only if you promise not to turn it into a boardroom lecture," she teased lightly, the hint of humor easing the tension between them. He smiled, feeling a rare sense of ease wash over him. "Deal," he said. As they spoke, Alexander reflected on the night's events. He had arrived at the restaurant thinking he controlled everything, that his wealth and experience were sufficient shields against failure. Yet the truth had been glaring. A single overlooked detail, unnoticed by his team of lawyers, could have obliterated everything he had worked for. And yet it hadn't. It had taken Lily, a stranger in a world he often deemed beneath him, to provide the clarity he lacked. It was a lesson that extended beyond finances. It was a lesson about people, about trust, and about the humility to recognize that wisdom can come from anyone, anywhere. He realized he had been missing this insight for years, letting arrogance dictate his actions, overlooking voices that might have guided him away from disaster. "Thank you, Lily," he said again more sincerely than before. "You reminded me of something I've forgotten, that sometimes saving yourself isn't just about money. It's about being open to help, even when it comes from unexpected places." She smiled, her eyes reflecting a quiet warmth. "I'm glad I could help," she replied. "And I think you've reminded me, too. Sometimes people need a little faith in others, even when they're powerful or famous. We all make mistakes." They walked together to the edge of the sidewalk, the morning air filled with the faint scent of rain-soaked streets and brewing coffee. Alexander felt a sense of renewal, as if the night's tension had scrubbed away layers of pride and arrogance, leaving him with a clearer, calmer perspective. The world was still unpredictable, still full of challenges, but he now understood that he did not have to face it alone or blinded by ego. Before parting ways, he extended his hand, not in the stiff formality of business, but in genuine gratitude. "Lily," he said, "you've changed the course of my life tonight. Don't ever underestimate the impact one person can have." She shook his hand firmly, smiling. "And you, Alexander, don't forget that even billionaires need a little help sometimes." With that, she turned to return to her work, disappearing into the gentle bustle of the morning restaurant. Alexander watched her go, a quiet admiration filling him, mingled with hope. The mistakes of the night were corrected, the looming bankruptcy avoided, and yet the most important transformation had occurred within himself. He opened his briefcase, reviewing the corrected documents once more. Everything was in order. The empire he had built, fragile though it may have been, had survived. But more importantly, Alexander Grant had survived as well. Not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. He had learned humility, the value of perspective, and the simple yet profound truth that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected places. Stepping back into the streets, he felt the city awaken around him. Morning traffic hummed. Shopkeepers opened doors, and joggers traced familiar routes along the river. The world had not stopped. It had continued, indifferent to his struggles. Yet within him, something had shifted irrevocably. He walked with a lighter step, a quiet smile playing on his lips. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. But Alexander Grant faced them with a new understanding, a renewed sense of purpose, and the humility to recognize that even the most powerful person sometimes needs a guiding hand. And somewhere in the midst of the morning bustle, Lily carried on, unaware that she had done more than serve tables tonight. She had reminded a billionaire that the smallest act of observation, courage, and care could save a life, an empire, and perhaps even a soul. As the sun fully rose over the city, Alexander took a deep breath, savoring the calm after the storm. The world was full of mistakes waiting to be made, but tonight had proven that even in the darkest hours, hope and humanity could illuminate the way forward. And with that realization, he finally felt free,